I now give the floor to His Excellency Valentin Rybakov, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Belarus.
Господин председатель.
President, ladies and gentlemen, a year ago at this organization's summit, world leaders gave the green light to the UN 2030 Development Agenda. This document became our common guide for the coming 15 years. In the history of this organization, there have already been similar grand initiatives. Unfortunately, some of them have remained confined to the paper. We just need to think about the idea from 40 years ago of the foundation of a new world economic order. I very much hope that the similar fate will not befall this current initiative. Today, such fears, however, do exist. The main problem is that the world does not have systemic stability. This means that there is no confidence in what will come tomorrow. Indeed, there is not a feeling that the world is developing within the framework of rational order and common sense. Wars, conflicts, and increasing transnational challenges give rise to a feeling of chaos. At the same time, this chaos exists side by side with unprecedented interconnectedness and scientific and technological progress. In other words, we are living in conditions of contradictory realities. How has this chaos become a competitor, a serious competitor with the positive globalization progresses? I think that there are three reasons for this: political, economic, and social. From a political point of view, problems have arisen because the so-called winners of the Cold War did not want to integrate into their system those who had lost that war. Furthermore, as was the case with World War I, the victors tried to impose their will on their opponents and to carry out serious global changes that affected all, not just them, and to carry out those changes unilaterally. This attempt was not successful. It could not have been otherwise. And it is probably true that history does teach us something here, but the consequences of this attempt were terrible. The destruction of states, many festering conflicts, megaterrorism, the new trend of migration as well. As a result, from the point of view of politics, the world is now in a transition. However, we don't know what we are moving towards. We must also consider the economic factor. In this context, in the world, there's always been a conflict between the state and the market, at least since the time of the Industrial Revolution. Balanced and healthy competition is unquestionably useful both for economic progress and also for reducing poverty and inequality. However, in recent decades, this balance has been disturbed. The market has gained the upper hand and the state has been relegated to second place. This has happened because this was the objective that was pursued by so-called corporate capital, which dominates life in leading developed countries. And what has this free market given us? For the minority, its true advocates, they have achieved even greater wealth, but for everybody else, it has meant nothing but suffering and problems. It is also important that the market has seriously exacerbated the environmental challenges in the planet. Indeed, the development of the market, is it concerned with anything other than profit? What does it care about the environment? Problems in the context of social issues probably aren't so obvious to the general public, but at the same time, they are no less serious and no less dangerous than the challenges we face in the political and economic spheres. We're seeing growing social and cultural gap in the world, and problems of identity are the primary ones here. As a result, we're spending more and more time arguing about things which, in essence, are a matter of our soul. Without question, there is an understanding of the reasons for the arising of a counterculture in the West half a century ago, and there is also an explanation of how this phenomenon has changed social relations in the West, in particular in areas such as morals, moral values, and the family. However, there is something that is not understandable, and that is why such changes should affect the rest of the world. Why should those who have accepted the changes try to impose them on others. Others weren't subject to the same historic reasons, and therefore there aren't the conditions that mean that their society should adopt similar changes. President, understanding the reasons which have called into life this unstable world that's full of contradictions is certainly important. That's the first step towards action. So what do we have to do to change this negative global context? In political terms, we need to have a clear understanding of where we want to go from this current period of transition. What is the new world order that we are endeavouring to create? Of course, this is easier said than done. And in this context, I can't help but quote the outstanding thinker Immanuel Kant. And I quote, "Building a just and peaceful international system is one of the most difficult of all tasks, and a perfect solution is impossible." End quote. Of course, we all have ideas about how to change the world, but those ideas are different, and we'll all have to sacrifice something if we want to enact a change for the better. The result, first and foremost, will depend or will reflect the lowest common denominator, but it is simply impossible to do otherwise. I'm not going to try and predict what the reality of this new world order will be in terms of its form and content. I would just like to focus our attention on three principles which we think are essential to build that world order. Firstly, the new system should be state-driven. States remain, as previously, the main players in international life. Where there are no states, or where they are weak, there anarchy, chaos and violence reign. Secondly, the new world order should be inclusive. This means that all states, without exception, should have a real voice within it, not just a voice for appearances. And third, I am deeply convinced that the new system cannot be imposed. It needs to be cultivated. Only then will it be viewed as fair by both politicians and ordinary people. In terms of the economy, we are seeing positive trends. First and foremost, this is in connection with the re-establishment of a balance between the state and the market. The financial and economic crisis of the last decade demonstrated the failure of the ideas of the free market. As a result, around the world, we're seeing the re-establishment and the strengthening of the role of the state in economic affairs, and it is important that that trend continue. Belarus has always been committed to the idea of a strong state, first and foremost in economic matters, and this is the policy we will continue in the future. This is the will of the Belarusian people, which was clearly expressed at the People's Assembly this summer. There's another important trend in the economic context, and that is regional integration. To some extent, regional blocs are beginning to play the same independent role that, until recently, was the prerogative of states. And if this is the case, then there is a real need to establish cooperation mechanisms between regional processes in the same way as we have mechanisms for cooperation between states. Belarus is very committed to this subject, and we are an active participant in a range of regional integration processes. We have an interest in strengthening these, and we're also deeply convinced that cooperation with other regional initiatives will make it easier to deal with this objective. To be brief, then our approach could be called integrating integration. To implement that idea, in Minsk we're going to have an international conference on this subject with the cooperation of the UN Economic Commission in Europe. And finally, on the need for activity in the social and cultural areas. We could begin with very simple truths. We're all different because of a range of different factors: geography, climate, wars, epidemics, religions and many others. And these factors have made us who we are. Tradition and culture cannot be changed. Ultimately, they bring us together in a certain territory. They brought together the people who died there, who are living there now, and those who have not yet been born. Therefore, it is obvious that imposing our preferences on each other is pointless and an endeavour without prospect. What we need in this situation is dialogue, but dialogue not just to understand the other side, it should be a goal in itself. Dialogue should be a constant process, a process which helps us to find common ground between different social and cultural approaches and to give a positive result. Let's take as an example the family. In Belarus, we're committed to the values of a traditional family. In some other countries, there is a recognition for a variety of forms of family. We think that the individual is part of a family, and opponents, however, assume that the individual belongs to the family. We don't need to demonstrate the rightness of our approach to each other. We should understand why we occupy different positions. Can our different approaches lead to some kind of positive result? I think that they can. In particular, the Republic of Belarus sees the opportunity for something in March next year in the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs, and that's a draft resolution on the role of the family in preventing the illicit drug trade. We all have an interest in an effective fight against this challenge. Let's think together about how the family may help in this area, despite the fact that we understand this concept differently. President, if member states really do want to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, then they're going to have to return the world to stability and overcome growing chaos. I'm convinced that achieving this is possible, and the United Nations is the forum with a rich range of expert potential which can help states in this endeavour. Having said that, it is important that the UN works on the practical implementation of this new agenda and isn't engulfed by the normal optimization, synchronization, writing of reports and so on and so forth. It is important that we recognize that the UN Secretariat has not always worked in harmony with member states. We hope that the situation will change for the better under the new head of our organisation. The new agenda for the UN, as well as the current global context, mean that we face significant challenges. Looking at the prospects for their implementation, I would call on all to be guided by the words of the second UN Secretary General, Dag Hammarskjöld, who said, and I quote, "Never measure the height of a mountain until you have reached the top. Then you will see how low it was." I end quote. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Belarus for his statement. I now give